it's actually almost 5 o'clock now, so we'll go for another. When do we have to be out of here, Brother Sean? 6. Ooh. All right, we better move quickly. This one is entitled Religious Liberty in the Age of Trump. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for Jesus Christ, who has done so much for us, and who has given us in his word a clear understanding of what to expect. And Lord, as we see these things unfolding in the world, we recognize that current events need to be analyzed and understood carefully in light of Bible prophecy. So we ask your Holy Spirit to be with us today in Jesus' name. Amen. Turn with me in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. I'm going to show you something Jesus said that radically changed the world. Or at least in the future. Not when Jesus actually said it, but in the future it radically changed the world. And it's a little story. It starts in verse 15. It says, the Pharisees then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. What were they going to do? Entangle Christ in his talk. In other words, they wanted to be able to either accuse him to the Romans or discredit him with the people. Alright? So, verse 16. They sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of man. In other words, flatter him. Right? Make him feel good. Make him feel like he, can say more than maybe he should. Tell us, therefore, they shrewdly asked him, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Now, if Jesus would have said if it's lawful to give unto Caesar, they would have accused him of disregarding the law of God because, they interpreted God's law as saying they should pay no tribute to anybody. All right? And if he said no, then they would accuse him to Caesar of stirring up insurrection. Right? That's what they wanted to do. But Jesus, it says in verse 18, perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they showed unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? They said unto him, it's Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Isn't that interesting? What a story. But what Jesus was doing was establishing the separation of church and state. Alright? He was separating the church and state by saying, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but unto God the things that are God's. In this statement is implied that God, of course, is higher than Caesar, and therefore we owe a higher allegiance to God than Caesar. We can support Caesar so long as Caesar doesn't require us to do anything that conflicts with our obligations to God. Isn't that right? That's how Jesus was setting this up. He separated church and state, and he used their trap not only to free himself, but to establish a principle that would not come into fruition for 1,700 years. He established the principle of religious liberty and placed loyalty to God above loyalty to the state. How so, you might ask? Well, if in fact we have a duty to God and to Caesar, then one of them is going to supersede the other, because if there is, and often there is a conflict between the secular state and the instruction of the Bible, it is obvious that loyalty to the divine Creator, Redeemer, and Lord is higher than that of Caesar. So, by rendering unto Caesar, we place, Caesar in his rightful place, more or less, but at the same time, we are not to compromise our principles to the God of heaven. Now, I want you to think about this in light of what's going on today. The Obama administration, for instance, assaulted religious liberty through the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Also, I want you to look at the energetic push of President Obama himself and others to enshrine same-sex marriage into law and then assault those who exercise their First Amendment rights and religious freedom to not serve gay weddings by lawsuits and other things, all right? All of this is very recent history that you know very well. President Trump then rode into the White House on the back of these twin issues by telling his supporters that he would restore religious liberty and give the churches much more power. Of course, there were other things, such as illegal immigration, treaties that took away American jobs that he also strongly spoke to, for instance. And now the president is attempting to do something about these things. With that background, let's look at Trump's religious freedom agenda and his actions to determine the trajectory of where this is going to end up. We need to get the big picture here. And if you look merely at his executive order on religious freedom, for instance, you know he put out an executive order on religious liberty just about 2 weeks ago, right? Okay? You're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we look merely at the executive order itself. There are some things that seem very good.
Yes.
For instance, the executive order carefully avoids, and I'm talking about to Adventists.
Yes.
The executive order carefully avoids any language that would look like the president is attempting to overthrow the Johnson Amendment. Wait a minute, he said he would destroy the Johnson Amendment, so why didn't he do it? And that has some evangelicals neck in a knot. But let's think about it for a minute. After all, he promised to overthrow the Johnson Amendment in his campaign for POTUS. Think about it for a minute. Trump has had a difficult time with some of his key issues, as Democrats and other liberals have consistently targeted his initiative with lawsuits, judgments, media rhetoric, and other opposition. Furthermore, the Johnson Amendment was a regulation that was added to the IRS code that prevents nonprofit religious organizations from meddling in any political campaign directly. To remove the Johnson Amendment would create some challenges that would have unintended consequences. And while we don't know what he will do in the future, we can be thankful that the Johnson Amendment at least is still in place, because it limits the ability of churches to directly advocate for one candidate or another. Repealing it would actually harm religious freedom in the long run, as you will see. When you think about it, America is one of the most polarized times in its history. Perhaps second only to the Civil War. The media cannot restrain itself and be objective. The liberal media is clearly and unabashedly biased against President Trump in anything he tries to do that's worth doing. They don't even keep a veneer of objectivity anymore. This just stokes the polarization and pushes Americans so far to the left and right that they can't even talk intelligently to each other. Gone are the days of reasoned political discourse. In this context, with political emotions at a fever pitch, with evangelicals salivating for more power, the repeal of the Johnson Amendment seemed almost a foregone conclusion given President Trump's campaign promises. But his executive order on religious freedom actually stops short of instructing the IRS not to enforce it anymore, the Johnson Amendment. And while this is annoying to the religious right, and it is very annoying to some people, it protects a key principle by affirming existing applicable law 4 times in the order. I'm going to just read one section of the order. Actually 2. Section 1, policy. it shall be the policy of the executive branch to vigorously enforce federal law's robust protections for religious freedom. The founders envisioned a nation in which religious voices and views were integral to a vibrant public square, and in which religious people and institutions are free to practice their faith without fear of discrimination or retaliation by the federal government. For that reason, the United States Constitution enshrines and protects the fundamental right to religious liberty as Americans' first freedom. Federal law protects the freedom of Americans and their organizations to exercise religion and participate fully in civic life without undue interference by the federal government. The executive branch will honor and enforce those protections. In other words, theoretically at least, people who sell flowers for weddings don't have to supply flowers to gay weddings. Theoretically. In some states, of course, as it goes right on up. And this is why the Supreme Court is very important to the Trump administration, to have a conservative, to the evangelicals, to have a conservative Supreme Court. Because a conservative Supreme Court won't support same-sex marriage, or at least it won't support persecution or prosecution of those who run amok of the gay agenda. Number 2. Section 2, respecting religious and political speech. All executive departments and agencies shall, to the greatest extent practicable and to the extent permitted by law. What law? All laws, including the Johnson Amendment. Respect and protect the freedom of persons and organizations to engage in religious and political speech. In particular, the Secretary of the Treasury shall ensure, to the extent permitted by law, what law? Well, including the Johnson Amendment, that the Department of the Treasury does not take any adverse action against any individual, house of worship, or other religious organization on the basis that such individual or organization speaks or has spoken about moral and political issues from a religious perspective, where speech of similar character has, consistent with law, that's number 3, not ordinarily been treated as participation or intervention in a political campaign. So in other words, these new definitions of intervention in a political campaign is all being brushed aside. So it's going back to the old definition. As used in this section, the term adverse action means an imposition of any tax or tax penalty, the delay or denial of tax-exempt status, the disallowance of tax deductions for contributions made to entities exempted from taxation under 501c3, or any other action that makes unavailable or denies any tax deduction, exemption, credit, or benefit to these people who are exercising their religious liberty. All right, so the executive order mostly leaves the Johnson Amendment in place, intact. In essence, the government can still challenge the tax-exempt status of organizations that engage in participation or intervention in a political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to a particular candidate for public office. However, in recent months, even as Donald Trump has done this, he knows that executive orders are actually quite flimsy once a president has left office. All his executive orders are up for grabs because they can be undone by the next president. So it's actually better to have Congress eliminate the Johnson Amendment if possible. And sure enough, over the last few months, Congress has had several bills that it is considering that are designed to overthrow the Johnson Amendment or outright repeal the Johnson Amendment. His executive order protects the right of non-profit religious organizations to speak to the moral and political issues without fear of losing their tax-exempt status. And he campaigned on the idea that getting rid of the Johnson Amendment would actually give them freedom of speech. That was how Trump painted it, but that's actually inaccurate. Well, that's no surprise, I don't suppose. It's inaccurate because the Johnson Amendment is not about freedom of speech. The Johnson Amendment is about preventing money from flowing into churches to support campaigns. It's not about free speech. Ministers and other religious leaders already have the right to say whatever they want about religious issues that are in the political and social sphere. They already can say what they want. It's not about giving them free speech again. It's about giving them opportunities to take money and use it to influence government. So, there's a big issue going on there that is misunderstood by most people, including most Adventists. Now get this, Trump signed the executive order with Roman Catholic, evangelical, and Jewish leaders, among others, around him at the White House Rose Garden on the annual National Day of Prayer, of all things. And before the signing ceremony in the Rose Garden, Mr. Trump met in the Oval Office, privately, with Cardinal Daniel Nadardo, head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. What was that all about? And Cardinal Donald Wuerl, Archbishop of Washington, D.C. They were also at the signing ceremony along with other Catholic leaders, including Joe Sella, the head of the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, and members of the Little Sisters of the Poor. Those are the nuns who ran amok of the Obama administration over provisions in the Affordable Care Act. Mr. Trump offered remarks during the ceremony, thanking religious leaders for joining him in the Rose Garden. It's a beautiful thing, he said, to see these three faith leaders from three very different faith traditions come together and lift up our nation in prayer. Not only are we a nation of faith, we're a nation of tolerance. Tolerance? Wait a minute. What's the difference between tolerance and freedom? Do you know the difference between tolerance? He said tolerance. He didn't say we're a nation of freedom. We're actually a nation of tolerance. Sorry? Compromise. More or less. Tolerance is not freedom. Tolerance means that we give a certain liberty to people to do their thing that's different from the rest of us. Freedom is when they have the inalienable right to do those things and nobody can get in the way. And there's a huge difference between the two. Roger Williams said that intolerance is intolerable because it's one step away from... Tolerance is intolerable because it's one step away from intolerance. Okay, you get it? Did I say that right? Okay. Then Mr. Trump went on to say, no American should be forced to choose between the dictates of the federal government and the tenets of their faith. Now that's freedom. That's not, and he's talking in two different, it's mixed language that he's using here. Anyway, he said he was directing the Justice Department to develop new rules to ensure these religious protections were afforded to all Americans. Why new rules? Why not just abandon the new rules that have already been made to restrict those freedoms and go back to the old way that it was? It was working fine for all those years. New rules. What happens when you put new rules in? Then you can shape those new rules to the way you want it to be. And my guess is that being that he's a politician, he's not going to shape the new rules to benefit you or me so much as those evangelicals who put him in office. Unless you're one of those evangelicals that put him in office. Oh. He also included wording relating to political speech, where speech of similar character has, consistent with law, not ordinarily been treated as participation or intervention in a political campaign. In other words, so long as political speech by churches and other non-profits does not directly interfere with a political campaign, their non-profit status will not be challenged. will not allow people of faith to be targeted, bullied, or silenced anymore. We will never, ever stand for religious discrimination. This is a politician talking. Do you trust him? Listen, friends, he may be sincere with what he says. I'm not judging his sincerity. But politicians come under pressure. And what happens when they come under pressure? They change. In fact, over the years, and maybe Trump is different, but over the years, as I've watched politicians, they say they're going to do something, they do the exact opposite. If they say they're not going to do something, they do it. So when politicians talk, I always take the opposite tack. Say, okay, this is what's coming. Not that, this. And usually it works out. Have you noticed? It's funny how that is. And most Americans don't get it. They just fall for it. You know, they'll go for it. You know, they'll just go for that. Anyway, I wanted. The night before the signing of the executive order, President Trump dined with several high-profile evangelical leaders in the White House, including Robert Jeffress. Anybody know who Robert Jeffress is? Okay, one or two of you. He's an evangelical preacher. Well known. Obviously not to all of you here. To evangelicals, he's well known. Greg Laurie. Does anybody know Greg Laurie? Okay. How about Jerry Falwell? Everybody knows Jerry Falwell Jr., right? All right. How about Paula White? Everybody knows her? These are all people that were there. James Dobson. Of course, you've heard of him. Mark Burns. He's a South Carolina pastor. Franklin Graham. You know who he is? And Eric Metaxas. Another evangelical preacher. He's a black preacher. You ought to know him, right? And if you don't know who these people are, you can write down their names and look them up on the web. Also, you can listen to our sermon called Trump's Dangerous Advisors. You see, all these people are part of Trump's Faith Advisory Board. And they think they have special access to the president. They're all friends, you see. These are very powerful evangelical leaders who influence perhaps millions of people collectively. The problem is that they are now seeking for a place in the halls of power and influence. What are they doing wrong? The problem is they're now seeking for a place at the political table, the halls of power and influence. And to do so, they're willing to treat Mr. Trump even as if he's a god. Greg Laurie, the pastor of the Harvest Christian Fellowship Church in Riverside, California, said that the group when they went to the Lincoln bedroom, he took them on a tour. After the dinner, Trump took them on a tour of the second floor of the White House, okay? When they went to the Lincoln bedroom, Greg Laurie said that the group was reduced to being like children, which is terminology usually applied to encounters with God during worship. Jerry Falwell praised the executive order and said, evangelicals have found their dream president. Robert Jeffress said the executive order ended the 60-year war on religious liberty. Not really, but anyway, he said that. Even though it didn't do anything to remove the Johnson Amendment. See, they see the Johnson Amendment as opposed to most of these guys. Obviously, somebody's talking to them behind the scenes because they're still supporting Trump. Somebody's talking to them behind the scenes. Why? Well, probably because they say, okay, well, look, let's let Congress deal with that. It's better if Congress repeals the Johnson Amendment than if the president repeals it. It's a whole lot more stable and a whole lot more secure. So they're waiting patiently for Congress to deal with it. And Trump made his statement about religious freedom or religious liberty, but he also gave Congress lots of room. So some people were very disappointed the executive order didn't repeal repeal the Johnson Amendment. But in fact, the president doesn't actually have the authority to do that. The president doesn't have the authority to override Congress, except on the vote where he exercises his veto. So he doesn't actually have the option to remove the Johnson Amendment directly. And of course, as I said, an executive order can be easily undone by a future president. But these evangelicals, what do they believe? See, these are Christian leaders of megachurches and parachurch organizations that think it is a good idea for ministers to endorse political candidates from the pulpit. They want political power and money in order to fulfill their agenda to make America a Christian nation, whatever that means. While that sounds good, it is ominous and full of prophetic potential. Think about the implications of removing the Johnson Amendment, which, by the way, I think will probably happen at some point. So get ready. The Johnson Amendment was enacted in Congress in 1954 and is named after its sponsor, Lyndon B. Johnson. Does anybody remember who Lyndon B. Johnson was? All right, he became vice president with John F. Kennedy and then president after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The amendment is a prohibition on churches and other houses of worship to prevent tax-exempt organizations from publicly favoring or endorsing one candidate or another. It includes the strict prohibition of financing a candidate or organizing a campaign for him or her. See, it's the money. You follow the money. President Trump said that the Johnson Amendment needed to be repealed so the churches regain their free speech. That's not what it's about, as I already told you. But it's about politicians receiving tax-deductible campaign financing from churches. The tax deduction is the key. You see, people who want to donate to campaigns can't get a tax deduction at the moment, and so they have no reason other than to just donate directly to the campaign. But if they remove the Johnson Amendment, they can then donate directly to a church and then get a tax-deductible receipt for it. So if they donate $500,000 to a church for a political campaign, they get $500,000 of tax-deductible receipt. That has power to corrupt big time. Not only corrupt the church, but even corrupt the state even more. So now all of a sudden they would get tax-deductible. What would happen then if the Johnson Amendment was removed? All right, it would mean that churches would be permitted to donate a significant amount of its members' offerings and tithes to fund the political candidate that the church board or the pastor decides to support. Would churches get more donations? Oh, yes, they would, because the gifts, which right now aren't tax deductible, would become tax deductible. That has a huge advantage. And politicians would not be slack in uniting with churches to get this blessed money, this blessed campaign money, while offering churches more power, just as Donald Trump did during the campaign. He said, if I become president, it will be so good for you pastors. See? Would donors, particularly big donors, be in a position to manipulate the message of the mega churches and pastors? It's another side to it, isn't it? You bet they would. And would such a move be unifying to the churches themselves, or would it be divisive? How polemic could it become if pastors and congregations would argue over who will get their wad of cash? Would this make it awkward for churches to make the choice to endorse a slate of Democrats or Republicans while trying to maintain some semblance of unity? It would make it really hard, I think. Discussions about political matters are already divisive without bringing them into the church sanctuary. In fact, since we are in the most politically polarized era in many, many, many years, this would simply bring those divisive matters into the inner workings of churches. Would politicians who want to benefit from the largesse have sudden and superficial conversion experiences to the faith of the church that offers the most support? You think about that. That's serious business. You know, the Johnson Amendment was brought in by a Democrat who was very much against political involvement of the churches. You know, whatever you thought of Lyndon B. Johnson, bringing that in was actually very good. We are here today because of that Johnson Amendment. Here's another question to contemplate. Why do popular preachers and pastors want more power? It's because they lack power in their lives and in their preaching to address the sin problems in themselves and in their membership. That's the fundamental issue. Some of them can preach very emotional sermons and get their members all affected, very affected. But they don't normally address the sin problem and unpopular truths that would make their members wise unto salvation. In fact, they're usually justifying sin in the name of getting people to heaven. Aren't they? Listen to this very interesting statement found in the book Great Controversy, page 584. No error accepted by the Christian world strikes more boldly against the authority of heaven. None is more directly opposed to the dictates of reason. None is more pernicious in its results than the modern doctrine so rapidly gaining ground that the law of God is no longer binding upon men. So what is the most pernicious teaching in the churches today? The law of God is no longer binding. It is the denial that God's law still is in force. In fact, this doctrine actually undermines the stability and tranquility of society in general. Did you know that the evangelical pastors who teach this are actually undermining stability in society? Here's how. Every nation has its laws. Ellen White's writing this. Which command respect and obedience. No government could exist without them. And can it be conceived that the creator of the heavens and the earth has no law to govern the beings he has made? Suppose the prominent ministers, evangelical ministers, right? The big ones out there, the mega churches. The prominent ministers were publicly to teach that the statutes which govern our land and protect the rights of its citizens are not obligatory, that they are restricted. They are restricting the liberties of the people and therefore ought not to be obeyed. Imagine if they would say this. How long would such men be tolerated in the pulpit? You see, it is even greater offense to disregard the laws of states and nations. Sorry, this is a question. Is it a graver offense to disregard the laws of states and nations than to trample upon those divine precepts which are the foundation of all government? You know? You see, that's quite a question, my friends. What would happen if ministers advocated such anarchy? Well, yes, in fact, that's what they're doing when they say the law of God is no longer in force. And actually, in more recent times, some of them have been saying that the law of God actually is in force and we need to obey it, except the fourth commandment, which has been done away with at the cross. Now, wait a second. If you can pick and choose, you really haven't put anything in force at all. It's all the same. In fact, we're told the scenes in France. Let me go on. It would be far more consistent for nations to abolish their statutes and permit the people to do as they please than for the ruler of the universe to annul his law and leave the world without a standard to condemn the guilty and justify the obedient. Would we know the result of making void the law of God? Well, the experiment has been tried. Terrible were the scenes enacted in France when atheism became the controlling power. It was then demonstrated to the world that to throw off the restraints which God has imposed is to accept the rule of the cruelest of tyrants. And when the standard of righteousness is set aside, the way is open for the prince of evil to establish his power in the earth. I hope you're not very happy with the prince of evil, and that you refuse to go along with him in your life. Well, in fact, we're told that the scenes in France are a prophetic prototype of the scenes that will take place at the end of time on the whole world. Here it is, Education, page 228. At the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine but human. The centralizing of wealth and power. We have that today, don't we? Centralizing of wealth and power. All right? The vast combinations of enriching the few at the expense of the many. We have that today, don't we? The combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interest and claim. We've got to stand for our rights. Right? Okay, there it is. This idea that we have to defend ourselves is somehow contrary to God's counsel and will bring anarchy and ruin. We talked about that a bit this morning, didn't we? The combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed. Do we have unrest, riot, and bloodshed? And we all have all kinds of marches, some of them turn violent. The worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution. There is no God. Science is all about that almost. For instance. And more secular people have thrown out the idea that God exists at all. All of these things are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. Will there be guillotines? Maybe. Perhaps. Possibly. Yeah, maybe. Certainly possible, isn't it? Will there be beheadings of other types? Prison sentences, drownings, just for the sake of exterminating extremism. You know, if the terrorists can behead people, so can governments. Really, if they want to. I'll continue reading from Great Controversy 584. Whenever the divine precepts are rejected, sin ceases to appear sinful and righteousness desirable. Those who refuse to submit to the government of God are wholly unfitted to govern themselves, and through their pernicious teachings, the spirit of insubordination is implanted in the hearts of children and youth, who are naturally impatient of control, and lawless, licentious state of society results. While scoffing at the cruelty of while scoffing at the credulity of those who obey the requirements of God, the multitudes eagerly accept the delusions of Satan. That's what's going to happen, my friends, to you if you're faithful to Christ. They give the rein to lust and practice the sins which have called down the judgments on the heathen, like Sodom and Gomorrah, which we have in full swing today. Well, we can go on about that. Ellen White actually has quite a bit to say about rejecting the law of God. The repeal of the Johnson Amendment would cross a prophetic line. It would create a set of circumstances in which the churches that have rejected the perpetual law of God and made it none effect, as from the Old Testament dispensation, are now seeking to find ways to buttress their lack of power and to change society through political means. And one thing we learned from the French Reformation, for instance, not the Revolution, but the French Reformation, if you read your Bible, if you read Great Controversy about the French Reformation, you will see that politics can never reform the church. I'm talking about secular politics. can never bring reform of society. It can never bring reform of the church or anyone else. Only a change of heart can bring reform. Anyway, so these campaigns need more money all the time. They're always needing more money. And these campaigners, these people who are running for office, will come with hat in hand to the church for direct financial support if the Johnson Amendment is removed. This is serious, my friends. It's wicked. The fact that Mr. Trump's executive order does not remove the Johnson Amendment is only because he doesn't have the power to do so. He would love to do so. But as legislative bills wind their way through Congress to repeal the Johnson Amendment, we can still see that there's an effort to undo the safeguards against the mixing of church and state. This is very serious, and we need the Johnson Amendment in place so that the rise of church power over the state will not happen, at least at this time. So pray, my friends, that the angels will hold back the winds of strife and keep the Johnson Amendment in place. But the Bible predicts that it will come sooner or later. But we must pray that the angels will hold back the winds. Why? Why should we pray that the angels hold back the winds of strife? Because if they don't, how many people are ready for heaven? How many people in the church, the Adventist church, let alone the rest of the world, are ready for heaven? You see, the angels hold back the winds of strife in mercy, my friends. God is so merciful. He's merciful to your own sinfulness, your own wickedness in your own life and mine. He's merciful to those people out there in Atlanta who have no clue what's coming upon them, so that you'll have time to go out and reach them and help them find their way. That's the bottom line. The National Council of Nonprofits had a very interesting perspective, and I guess we'll have to close with this. The National Council of Nonprofits expressed strong opposition to the latest attempts to politicize charities and foundations. To do what? Politicize charities and foundations by the removal of the Johnson Amendment. And what it said is that removing the Johnson Amendment would politicize the churches, charities, and other nonprofits. Tim Delaney, who's the CEO of it, of the nonprofits organization, says this: nonpartisanship is vital to the work of charitable nonprofits. What's nonpartisanship? Neither for one party or the other. They work without regard to political parties, political interests. Nonpartisanship enables organizations to address community challenges and invites the problem-solving skills of all residents without the distraction of party labels and the caustic partisanship that is bedeviling our country. Indeed, current law is the reason that charitable nonprofits are safe havens from politics, a place where people can come together to actually solve community problems rather than just posture and remain torn apart. It's very insightful, isn't it? We need safe places from politics. And now taking the Johnson Amendment out of the mix is going to invite partisan politics to come into these charitable and community organizations. For the last 6 decades, the law now being attacked, the Johnson Amendment, has protected, did you hear that word? Protected charitable nonprofits and foundations from being pressured by politicians and paid political operatives to divert their time and resources from advancing their mission in local communities. That law has a proven track record of working well to protect against politicization. Nonprofits are already free to exercise their First Amendment rights to advocate for their mission. Allowing political operatives to push for endorsements would put nonprofit position where they become known as Democratic charities or Republican charities and put mission at risk. Do you want to put the church mission at risk?
No.
Well, then don't let the Johnson Amendment go. And by the way, what happens in the evangelical churches eventually happens in the Adventist church. Did you know that? Women's ordination, rock music, we could list quite a few things, actually. The One Project, spiritual formation, emerging church. All of that comes from the Jesuits into the evangelicals and now into the Adventist church. Furthermore, those who donate to nonprofits want those contributions to go toward advancing the mission, not toward advancing the careers of politicians or lining the pockets of political consultants. Getting involved in supporting and opposing candidates will have a chilling effect on contributions on which many nonprofits rely. Isn't that interesting? So they'll start taking donations for political candidates, not for their mission so much. So repealing the Johnson Amendment would provide churches with the ability to use tax-free donations to endorse political candidates, and that's what these candidates would love. They would just love it. Romanism in the old world, my friends, and Protestantism in the new will pursue a similar course toward those who honor all the divine precepts. That's 615 of Great Controversy. They're working together. All of this is playing right into the hands of Rome. So friends, what are we going to do? How are we going to live? What's going to happen? I don't know about you, but I just pray that my life will be right with Jesus Christ, so that when these things unfold, I'll be ready to face whatever is coming my way, the overwhelming surprise. My prayer is the same for you. I hope and pray, my friends, that you're paying attention to these things and realize that this is no longer time to play around with your salvation. Don't get involved in politics. Don't get involved in the emotions of political things that stir and roil communities. Don't get involved in the fracas over Donald Trump. It's worthless. Most of it's a lot of just hot air anyway. Look at the real issues, the prophetically significant issues. Those are the things that should take our attention. And may the Lord bless you and keep you is my prayer. Amen. Thank you so much for being here today, my friends. And may the Lord's blessing go with you. Watch between us one from another until we meet again sometime, somewhere, who knows where, maybe here in this church, maybe in some other church in this area or whatever, I don't know. But whenever that happens, I look forward to seeing you again if you're still on planet Earth. And if I'm still on planet Earth. And if Jesus hasn't come yet, which means that we won't be on planet Earth anymore. All right? Sorry? This was called Religious Liberty in the Age of Trump. All right? So let's close with a prayer and ask God's blessing, shall we? Would you kneel with me, please? If possible. Our Father in heaven, once again, thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity we've had to spend this Sabbath together. Father, it's inspiring to think that Jesus is coming soon. And that as we see the signs of the times fulfilling Bible prophecy, we recognize that his coming is soon. But also, Lord, it's a solemn warning to us to not spend our time on foolishness and empty talk and rhetoric and argumentation and fighting over anything. It's not worth it. Father in heaven, help us to let go of our rights. Even though they're guaranteed to us, they're going to be taken away anyway. So if we get emotionally stirred up about them now, we'll just get emotionally stirred up then. So it's better just to not worry about those things. Father in heaven, I pray for your presence. And as we go from this place, we ask that your Spirit will go with us to teach us how to understand the events that are taking place around us. And it's in Jesus' thank you and praise